The summer of 1847 arrived in Louisiana like a fever, thick, sweet, and merciless. Heat clung to skin and fabric magnolia perfume, fighting a losing battle against the sour stink of standing water sweat and rot. At Bowmont, a plantation spread across St. Helena Parish like an empire, the days did not simply pass. They pressed down, forcing everyone beneath them to bend. If this story pulls you in, subscribe now so you don't miss the next one. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what this made you feel, because the smallest reactions sometimes reveal the biggest truths. Bowmont belonged to Governor Charles Bowmont, a man who treated land the way he treated people, as instruments of power. 20,000 acres, 300 enslaved souls counted in ledgers like livestock, cotton fields stretching so far they looked like a pale, endless sea. The mansion at the center rose white and gleaming, a temple built from stolen labor columns reaching for god marble floors shipped from Italy. Chandeliers that threw ice-bright light across rooms where laughter was required and truth was forbidden. Eleanora Bowmont, called Eleanor by polite society, Mrs. Bowmont by the staff, my wife by her husband, moved through that temple like a living portrait. She was 32 and already an expert in the performance demanded of her. The careful posture, the precise smile, the graceful hand on a guest's sleeve, the gentle laugh at jokes she did not find funny. Her blonde hair was always arranged as if time itself were her servant. In parlors from Baton Rouge to New Orleans, people spoke of her beauty and her taste, never of her mind, never of her loneliness, admired but not known, envied but not understood. Her marriage had never been a love story. When Eleanor was 17, her father traded her future for favor, tying her to Charles Bowmont's rising career. Charles was 57 now, his face carved sharp by ambition. He spoke the language of progress and refinement, yet his wealth bled from hands he never shook. He wanted a wife the way he wanted a plantation to display, to manage, to control. Separate wings, separate lives, separate silences under the same roof. Eleanor's days were structured like a cage that pretended to be comfort. Breakfast served on silver, calls and visits and needlework, Sunday prayers for a God who was always invoked to justify the unjustifiable. At night, she lay in a room that was technically hers, but never entirely. Even her own thoughts felt monitored, trained to obey. She had learned to survive by becoming harmless, polite, calm, decorative. She did it so well that sometimes she almost believed the role was real. Then one morning in late May, she walked somewhere she rarely went. The heat had not yet reached its worst. There was a softness in the light that Louisiana would soon destroy. Eleanor crossed the garden paths past roses, past the neat edges of the world that belonged to her, and drifted toward the stables. She told herself she was inspecting a new mare Charles had purchased, another expensive indulgence, another symbol to feed his hunger for admiration. But the truth was simpler. She felt restless, and she did not know why. Inside the stables, a man was shoeing a horse. His name was Elijah, though the plantation record listed him as item 47, acquired in 1839 for $800. He was 30. He stood tall and solid, his body shaped by work that would have broken many men. Sweat darkened his shirt, and his arms moved with steady precision. But it was his eyes that stopped Eleanor where she stood. Eyes that did not drop to the ground. Eyes that did not soften into submission. Eyes that refused to be smaller than the person staring at him. He looked at her for 3 seconds that stretched into something vast and dangerous, and then returned to his work as if she were simply another part of the day. Something in Eleanor cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically. More like an old lock giving way. She heard herself speak before she decided to. "What is your name?" Elijah did not look up. His voice was careful. "Elijah, ma'am. Elijah," she repeated, and the name felt like both prayer and blasphemy. She left too quickly, her heart moving like a frightened animal in her chest. That night, she couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. She lay in the dark, listening to the distant sounds of a house settling, of servants moving in quiet rhythms, of her husband's heavy breathing in another room, and all she could see was a pair of eyes refusing to disappear. In a rational world, it would have ended there. In a world built on safety, Eleanor would have returned to her parlors and her polite visits, and Elijah would have remained what the law insisted he was: property, a tool, a thing. But the heart does not obey the law, and once hunger wakes, it does not accept silence as food. 3 days later, before the household stirred, Eleanor walked into the rose garden. She told herself she wanted air. She told herself she wanted solitude. She told herself lies because truth would have been too sharp to hold. Elijah was there pruning roses. His presence was not unusual. Enslaved people were everywhere and nowhere visible only when needed, invisible when inconvenient. Yet Eleanor felt with the intuition of guilt that this was not coincidence. Someone had placed him here. Fate, the overseer, a cruel game of proximity. "They're beautiful," Eleanor said, gesturing toward the blossoms. "Yes, ma'am. Neutral. Empty. Safe." She should have turned away. Instead, she asked, "Do you have a family?" The question was dangerous. Families among enslaved people existed, but never securely, never protected by law, never safe from auction blocks, never immune to a master's profit. Elijah's hands did not stop moving. "Had a wife once," he said quietly. "Sold 7 years back. Alabama, I heard. Had a daughter, too. Never knew what happened to her." Eleanor felt her throat tighten. She had heard stories like that her entire life, told in lowered voices, shrugged off as unfortunate realities accepted like weather. But hearing it from the man's mouth made it real in a way that broke through the numbness she'd built to survive. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He looked at her, then truly looked, and something flickered across his face. Not hope, not trust, but recognition. The small shock of being spoken to as if he were human. "Sorrow don't change nothing," he said. "But I thank you for it anyway." She came back the next morning and the morning after that. At first, they barely spoke. She walked among roses while he tended them, silence heavy with words that had no safe place to land. But gradually, carefully, small exchanges grew into something more. Eleanor asked about the roses, and Elijah taught her their names, their needs, their seasons, the patience required to make beauty bloom in hostile soil. He spoke of pruning and timing, of cutting back to survive. In his quiet knowledge, she heard a language of endurance. She told him about books she had read, about cities she would never see, about the suffocating emptiness of living entirely for appearance. She didn't say she was lonely. That would have been too naked. But the loneliness showed itself anyway in the pauses, in the way her voice softened when she forgot to perform. The house servants noticed first. They always did. Enslaved people survived by paying attention. They saw Eleanor rising before dawn, saw her linger when Elijah was present, saw her return to the house with a face that looked almost alive. Mama Seraphine, the cook who had served the Bowmont family for 34 years, watched with eyes that had witnessed too much to be surprised. She said nothing, but she began leaving biscuits wrapped in cloth near the garden gate. A small kindness, a quiet warning, a prayer against the storm she felt gathering. Because everyone knew what happened when white women looked at black men with anything other than contempt or indifference. Everyone knew the stories, false accusations, public punishments, bodies left swinging from trees as lessons. In that world, a white woman's desire could become a death sentence for a black man, even if he had done nothing at all. By late June, Eleanor and Elijah spoke of things that mattered. She told him about her marriage not with melodrama, but with careful confession. The loneliness, the sense of being a decoration rather than a person, the slow suffocation of a life chosen by others. Elijah spoke of freedom as a memory, not a place. Brief flashes of childhood before his first sail at 8 years old. His mother's voice, food grown by his own hands, moments when he had belonged to himself. They still did not touch. They kept the physical distance the world demanded, but in every other way they reached toward each other across a divide meant to be absolute. In the mansion, Governor Bowmont noticed his wife smiling again. He did not know why, and that unsettled him. A man like Charles understood power and control. A cheerful wife was pleasing, but a wife with secrets was dangerous. He began to watch. July arrived with biblical heat. The air turned thick enough to swallow. The cotton fields shimmered. Enslaved workers moved through them like ghosts, bodies pushed beyond exhaustion. Inside the mansion, Eleanor felt the heat as something different: fever madness, the physical manifestation of what was growing inside her chest. Elijah was reassigned to work closer to the main house. The overseer, Thaddeus Cole, a lean man with a whip at his belt and cruelty in his bones, made the change without explanation. Some whispered it was coincidence. Others knew better. Cole had noticed. The governor had noticed. Surveillance tightened like a noose. One morning, Mama Seraphine caught Eleanor in the hallway. "Child," she said, voice low, "you playing with fire that going to burn more than just you?" Eleanor forced a smile. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do." Seraphine's eyes held fear, not for Eleanor's reputation, but for Elijah's life. "Don't matter what you done or ain't done. Matters what it looked like. Matters what the governor going to think when he find out." "I'll be careful," Eleanor whispered. "Careful ain't enough," Seraphine said. "Stop now before it's too late." But it was already too late, and both women knew it. That afternoon, Eleanor found Elijah in the workshed behind the stables repairing a wagon wheel. The space was dim, smelling of oil and wood shavings. For the first time, they were truly alone. No open garden, no chance of someone passing by. "You shouldn't be here," Elijah said, not looking up. "They watching now. Cole been asking questions." "I know," Eleanor replied, and her voice broke. He set down his tools and finally looked at her. Half his face was in shadow, but his eyes caught what little light seeped through the cracks in the wall. Then, "Why you here?" How could she explain 15 years of living like a porcelain figure in a glass cabinet? How could she say that the first time she felt real was when a man the world called property looked at her like she existed? The truth came out simple and terrifying. "Because I can't stay away." Elijah's jaw tightened. "You know what they do to men like me who even get accused of looking wrong at women like you? Don't matter if it's true. Don't matter if she the one who came to him." They tie him to a tree and he stopped as if the rest of the sentence was too brutal to give air. "You understand what I'm saying?" "Yes." "Then you understand. I can't want this. Wanting ain't for people like me. It's just a way to die faster." Eleanor stepped closer, one step, then another. Her hands trembled. "What if I wanted enough for both of us? That ain't how the world works. Miss, my name is Eleanor," she said. "Just Eleanor. When we're alone, don't call me Miss anything. Let me be a woman. Just once." Something shifted in Elijah's expression. A crack in the armor survival had forced him to wear. "You asking me to forget everything that keep me alive?" "I'm asking you to remember you're human," she whispered. "That I'm human. That this, whatever this is, it's real even if the world says it isn't." Elijah stared at her as if weighing the cost of every breath. Then quietly he spoke of his daughter. Her name was Grace. "I think about her every day. Wonder if she remember me. Wonder if she alive. Wonder if she growing up thinking her daddy just left her." His voice caught. "I couldn't save her. Couldn't save my wife. Couldn't save myself. And you standing here asking me to feel something. You know how much that hurt." Tears ran down Eleanor's face. "I'm sorry. God, I'm sorry. I didn't say..." "Stop," Elijah said. The words fell like a match into dry kindling. "I didn't say I don't feel it. I didn't say I don't see you when I close my eyes. I just said it hurt. He swallowed hard. But maybe something worth the hurt. Eleanor reached for him. Her fingers closed around his soft and jeweled against hands rough with calluses, hands marked by a lifetime of forced labor. When their fingers intertwined, it felt like revolution and damnation at once. They did not kiss. They did not move closer than that. They simply held on two people clinging to the smallest proof of humanity in a world designed to erase it. Footsteps approached. They broke apart instantly, terror moving faster than thought. Elijah grabbed his tools. Eleanor smoothed her dress. When Thaddeus Cole appeared in the doorway, they were 6 feet apart. Mistress and enslaved man, nothing improper to see. But Cole's eyes were sharp. He looked between them with the cold calculation of a hunter studying prey. Afternoon. Mrs. Bowmont, he said, false politeness dripping like poison. Can I help you find something? Eleanor forced her voice steady. I was looking for the stable master. My mare has been favoring her left foreleg. Cole smiled without warmth. Stable master in the south barn. This here just a work shed. Nothing of interest to a lady. Of course, Eleanor said and walked away slowly, every muscle screaming to run. That night she lay awake feeling the ghost of Elijah's hand in hers. And Elijah lay on his pallet touching his palm where her fingers had been trying to memorize the feeling before the world took it away. In August, Cole's vigilance hardened into obsession. Elijah was sent to the hardest fields, the most visible work. Eleanor could see him sometimes from a distance, but they could not speak. The silence became another kind of torture. So Eleanor did something reckless. She began to write. At night, by candlelight in a private sitting room, she poured onto paper the words she could not safely say. Confessions, memories, hunger. She wrote about the girl she had been before men decided her life. She wrote about the slow death of her marriage, about the brief, terrifying rebirth Elijah had sparked. At first, she did not intend to send the letters. Then the ache of silence became unbearable. She enlisted Dinah, a 16-year-old chambermaid, small and clever, trained by necessity to move unseen. Eleanor approached her in a quiet moment away from the dining room noise. She placed a wax-sealed letter in the girl's hands. I need you to give this to Elijah, Eleanor whispered. Please. Dinah's eyes widened with fear. Ma'am, if they catch me... They won't, Eleanor said quickly, then winced at the ugliness of what she'd implied. I mean, people don't pay attention. You can move places I can't. Please. I have no one else. Dinah stared at the letter like it might bite. Then she spoke with a clarity born of living under threat. If I do this, you gotta promise me something. When this blow up, and it will, you remember, I was just following orders. You protect me. Eleanor swallowed. I promise. No matter what. That night, Dinah carried the letter to the quarters, slipped it into Elijah's hand with a whisper and a warning. He waited until darkness settled, and the world grew quiet. By the careful light of a shielded candle, he broke the seal and read Eleanor's looping script. She wrote, I was dead before I met you. I moved through my life like a ghost. Then I saw you, and something woke up. I know the danger. Every thought of you risks your life, but I cannot stop. If any part of you feels what I feel, please write back. Please let me know I'm not alone. Elijah read it 3 times, hands shaking. He knew writing back was madness evidence that could kill him. Yet the human need to answer being seen was stronger than fear. He found a stub of pencil and a scrap of paper and wrote in careful, cramped lines the handwriting of a man who had taught himself in secret, risking beatings just to claim literacy. He wrote, I understand being dead. I've been dead inside since I was 8. Then you looked at me like I was a man. You making me remember I got a heart and hearts can break. I think about you all the time. You matter to me. If it seals my fate, at least I got to be alive. The letters continued through August into September. Dinah became the fragile thread between them, moving messages hidden in sleeves and baskets, terrified and determined. The words grew longer, deeper. They wrote about dreams they could never safely speak aloud. They did not always name love, but it lived in every line. I see you. I know you. You matter. And then, in late September, Governor Bowmont found the letters. He was searching Eleanor's desk for a key to her jewelry box, intending to borrow a necklace to impress a political ally's wife. Instead, his fingers found paper where paper should not be. Curiosity became suspicion. Suspicion became certainty, as he read Elijah's handwriting addressing his wife, not as property, not as a distant mistress, but as a person. Charles Bowmont did not shout. He did not smash furniture. He read each letter calmly, his face a politician's mask. When he finished, he folded them carefully and placed them in his coat pocket. Then he began to plan. Eleanor sensed the change the moment she returned home that evening. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that meant servants knew something terrible and were trying to survive it by becoming invisible. Dinah found her in the hallway, face tight with panic. "Ma'am," she whispered, "the governor been in your chambers." Eleanor's blood turned to ice. She ran upstairs, drawers open, compartments empty, every hiding place stripped. The evidence was gone. Her first thought was not for herself. "Elijah," she breathed. She seized Dinah by the shoulders. "You have to warn him. Tell him to run. Tonight." Dinah's tears spilled. "Too late, ma'am. Cole and 3 men already went to get him. Governor sent them an hour ago." Eleanor ran downstairs, out into the humid evening hair loosening dress, snagging on shrubs, all propriety abandoned. She reached the quarters in time to see torchlight and bodies in a cruel circle. Thaddeus Cole stood in the center. Elijah was beside him, hands tied, face already blooded. "Stop!" Eleanor screamed. "Stop this now!" Men turned, startled at the sight of a white woman in the quarters, wild and breathless. Cole's mouth curled into a satisfied smirk. "Mrs. Bowmont, best you return to the house. Ain't business for a lady. I said stop." Another voice cut through the night like a blade. "That's enough." Governor Bowmont approached from the direction of the main house, walking slowly, deliberately. Cold fury contained in every step. "Eleanor," he said, "return to the house immediately. Number." The word detonated in the air. Wives did not refuse husbands, especially not in front of enslaved people. Charles came closer, voice low. "You will return to the house, or I will have you carried there." "Then have me carried," Eleanor said, shaking but steady. "Because I'm not leaving him." For a moment, shock flickered across Charles's face, then vanished beneath contempt. "Do you understand what you've done?" he asked. "The humiliation, the scandal, the destruction of everything I've built." Eleanor's voice rose raw and honest. "I understand I fell in love with a man more decent than you will ever be. I understand I've spent 15 years being your decoration. And for the first time, I felt like a human being." Charles's hand moved fast. The slap knocked her sideways, stars bursting behind her eyes. She tasted blood. Elijah surged forward with a sound of rage, but men grabbed him. "Don't you touch her," he shouted, fighting. And in that moment, the mask of enforced submission fell away, revealing a full human being, angry, loving, alive. Charles turned to the men with terrible satisfaction. "You see," he said, "this animal thinks he has the right to defend a white woman." Eleanor tried to stand straight despite pain. "He has done nothing wrong," she said. "We wrote letters. We spoke. You wrote letters," Charles echoed, pulling the papers from his pocket. "Yes, I've read them. Every word." He looked at Elijah with ice. "Apparently you taught yourself to read and write. Another crime." Eleanor's voice shook. If you hurt him, I will never forgive you. I will leave you. I will tell everyone what kind of man you are." Charles laughed, soft amused. "Leave me with what money? What protection? You are my wife. Legally, you are nearly my property. You have only had my permission to pretend you possessed power." The truth landed like another blow. Eleanor had always known it in theory. In that moment, she tasted it like poison. "So here is what will happen." Charles' continued voice like a judge. "You will be sent to your sister in Charleston for 6 months. We will tell society you've suffered a nervous collapse. When you return, you will be obedient and grateful." His gaze shifted to Elijah. "And you?" Eleanor's stomach dropped. "Death is too quick," Charles said. "I am selling you tomorrow to a cotton operation in Mississippi. Crick's Plantation." Even the men around them understood that name. Crick's was a place whispered about like a curse. Work so brutal it ate human beings alive. 3 years maybe before a man broke into nothing. "You cannot," Eleanor pleaded, voice breaking. "Charles, please." "I can and I will," he replied. "He will be worked to death slowly, and you will live knowing your selfishness led directly to it." "No," Eleanor sobbed. Charles gestured. "Take him to the holding cell. Make sure he's ready for transport at dawn." Then to Eleanor, "Lock her in her chambers. Post guards. She speaks to no one." They dragged Elijah away. He did not fight. What was the point? Fighting would only add bruises to a sentence already written. As he passed Eleanor, their eyes met one last moment of connection. "I'm sorry," she mouthed. He shook his head, small and steady, as if to say there is nothing to apologize for, as if the brief time of being seen was worth the price. Eleanor was dragged back to the mansion, locked behind a door, guarded like a prisoner. She collapsed to the floor and wept until she felt hollow. She had destroyed him. Love had become a weapon. Around midnight, shouting rose outside. Eleanor stumbled to the window and saw flames licking at the night. The holding cell, storage sheds, the slave quarters burning. The fire was not an accident. It was a choice. In the chaos, Elijah vanished. They found the cell, empty lock broken. Dogs were sent out, but rain fell like mercy and erased his scent. Patrols searched the swamps and fields. Notices went out, rewards promised. But Elijah had become smoke, a ghost, a man refusing to be caught. Charles was furious, but he had bigger concerns: scandal, reputation control. Eleanor was sent to Charleston the next day as planned. She went quietly numb, feeling as if her soul had been scraped clean. The letters were burned. The story reshaped into something society could swallow: a wife with a nervous collapse, a slave who took advantage and ran. Society accepted the lie because the truth was too dangerous that a white woman and a black man had dared to see each other as equals. In Charleston, surrounded by pity and condescension, Eleanor survived. She played the role of the fragile woman recovering, but inside something hardened into purpose. She would not forgive, she would not forget, and she would watch for any sign that Elijah lived. 6 months became a year, then 2. Eleanor returned to Bowmont in spring 1848, thinner and quieter, her beauty dimmed by grief and anger. Charles accepted her because divorce would have been worse for his career. They resumed their separate lives, marriage a cold performance. Eleanor became a ghost, haunting a house she despised. There was no word of Elijah. He had not been caught. Either he had died unseen or he had made it north. Eleanor chose the only belief she could survive: he lived. And because she could not undo what she had done, she began to do what she could. Small rebellions, quiet acts. She arranged extra food for the quarters, medicine for the sick. She taught house servants to read in secret, locking her chamber door and whispering letters like prayers. Dinah became her ally, sharper now, older, carrying knowledge like a hidden knife. In 1852, Eleanor began documenting everything: names, families, sales, punishments, Thaddeus Cole's brutalities, Charles's business dealings, political corruption, the machinery of cruelty. She hid the pages in places no one would think to look. It was dangerous. If discovered, she could be destroyed, sent away, silenced, declared insane. But she wrote anyway because bearing witness was the only resistance available to her. Enslaved people began bringing her their stories. Mama Seraphine asked her to write down her granddaughter's name. Ruth, 12 years old, voiced like an angel. Eleanor wrote it carefully, promising memory as a form of dignity. Testimony became a quiet river beneath the plantation's surface, threatening to carve through stone. Then, in spring 1853, a letter arrived through Dinah, slipped by a traveling peddler, a free black man connected to networks of abolitionists and conductors. Eleanor recognized the handwriting before she finished the first line. Eleonora, I'm alive. I made it north. I'm in Canada. I'm free. She read it 3 times, tears soaking the paper. Elijah wrote of learning to read openly, of carpentry work, of waking each morning, and remembering his body belonged to him. He wrote that he should not contact her, but he had to let her know their choice had not been only destruction. He thanked her for seeing him, for helping him believe he was worth living for. Something in Eleanor crystallized into action. She found Dinah, voice shaking with urgency. I need to leave, she whispered. I need to go north. Dinah did not look shocked. She looked like someone who had been waiting. I've been wondering when you was going to decide, she said. You can sell jewelry. You got things. And you got me. I know people who know people. You're part of the Underground Railroad, Eleanor breathed. Not official, Dinah said, but I know roots, I know names. And if you serious, I can get you connected. But you gotta understand, when Charles finds out, he'll come for you. And he'll come for me, too. What about you? Eleanor asked. Dinah's eyes were steady. I'm tired of being scared. Tired of surviving. Maybe I run too. They planned in secret. Eleanor sold jewelry piece by piece. She gathered practical clothes. She prepared what records she could carry, determined to expose Bowmont's crimes. She wrote back to Elijah, I'm coming. Wait for me. I love you. I'm done pretending I don't. But in September, disaster struck. Charles discovered the documentation. Not by accident, because he had been watching. He found the hidden pages in Eleanor's chambers, evidence that could destroy him. His rage was cold and methodical. 5 years earlier, he had exiled her and tried to kill Elijah slowly. This time, he would ensure she could never threaten him again. On the night of October 15th, 1853, the mansion ignited. Fire started in the east wing among old draperies and stored furniture materials that burned hot and fast. By the time servants realized flames were racing through corridors like living hunger, Eleanor woke to smoke and shouting. She tried her door locked from the outside. She ran to the window fastened shut. Charles had sealed her in. The truth was clear, this was not accident. This was murder disguised as tragedy. The governor's unstable wife perishing in a terrible fire. A sorrowful loss. Convenient. Believable. Eleanor grabbed a heavy candlestick and smashed the window. Glass shattered outward, glittering 2 stories down. She cleared enough to breathe enough to see a path that might be death, but was not certain death. Then the chamber door crashed open. Dinah stood there, face streaked with soot eyes blazing. Behind her came Mama Seraphine and 2 other women. Move, Dinah shouted. No time. They ran through smoke-choked halls, heat pressed like fists. Timbers groaned. A chandelier fell and exploded across marble like crystal rain. They burst out the front doors onto the lawn amid chaos, water buckets, screams, people dragging valuables, enslaved workers trying to save what could be saved. Eleanor scanned the crowd. No Charles, no Cole. Her stomach tightened. He's inside, she said, sudden certainty. Something went wrong. He's trapped. Good, Dinah said flatly. Let him burn. Eleanor hated Charles. She hated what he had done to Elijah, to the enslaved people to her. Yet she found she could not stand and watch a human burn alive, even a monster. Not for him, but for herself. She refused to become his kind. I have to try, she said, and ran back into the inferno. Inside the house was hell. Smoke erased vision. Flames climbed walls like demons. Eleanor moved through familiar rooms transformed into nightmare. Charles, she screamed. Where are you? She found him in his study, pinned beneath a fallen beam. His face was gray pain carved into it. When he saw her, surprise flickered. You, he rasped. You came back. I'm an idiot, Eleanor said, grabbing the beam, straining. It did not move. Why did you do this? She demanded. Why try to kill me? Evidence. He coughed. Blood shone at his mouth. Your records. If you took them north, everything I built would be destroyed. So you decided to murder me. You forced my hand. He gasped. You've been forcing my hand since you looked at that slave like he was human. Eleanor's voice shook with fury. You forced my hand since the day you married a child. The floor tilted. The house groaned. Time ran out. Go, Charles said, panic creeping in. You can't save me. Eleanor kept pulling anyway, tears mixing with soot. I have to try. Not for you, for me, so I don't become you. Charles coughed again. You was always idealistic, he said, voice softening. I was angry. I'm sorry. A pause. Live. It was the first apology in 15 years, and it meant nothing and everything at once. Eleanor met his eyes. I know she said, though, she did not forgive. Dinah and Seraphine appeared through smoke, grabbed Eleanor's arms, and dragged her away. He dead anyway, Seraphine said bluntly. Beam crushed something, but you ain't dying with him. They hauled Eleanor out onto the lawn. Minutes later, the center of the mansion collapsed inward with a sound like the world cracking. Charles Bowmont died in the ruins of his empire. By dawn, the mansion was a smoking skeleton. Eleanor sat on the grass, stunned. Her hidden records were gone, burned. Names, testimonies, evidence turned to ash. But the people were still alive, still carrying stories no fire could erase. What happens now? Dinah asked. Eleanor stared at the ruins. Legally, the estate passes to Charles's brother, she said. The plantation will continue. You'll still be... She couldn't finish. Property. Dinah finished. So nothing really changed. Eleanor's throat tightened. Then she said, I'm still going north, and I'm taking anyone who wants to come. Dinah turned, searching her face. You serious? Completely, Eleanor said. Charles's brother will take weeks to arrive. In that time, this place will be chaos. That's our window. Some of us might make it. That's better than none of us trying. For a few days after the fire, the plantation existed in a strange suspension, as if the laws that governed Bowmont had been burned with the mansion. Without the big house watching work slowed. People moved differently, still cautious, still trained by fear, but with an unfamiliar looseness in their shoulders. Cole had vanished. Some said he fled the parish the night the mansion fell, afraid that in the confusion someone might settle old accounts. Others whispered he had been inside with the governor and burned with him, a fitting end for a man who had fed on other people's pain. No one mourned him openly, but Eleanor noticed the way the quarters sounded at night. Not joyful, not safe, but breathing in a way it had not before, like a crowd holding its lungs after years underwater and finally breaking the surface. Charles's brother was weeks away, but word would travel faster than wheels. Neighboring planters would arrive with questions. Parish officials would come to inventory losses to secure the estate, to make sure human property did not become inconveniently mobile. That window, the brief confusion before authority reassembled itself, was the only chance Eleanor would ever have. And she knew in the same cold way she had known the moment Charles found the letters that hesitation would be fatal. She and Dinah worked like conspirators in enemy territory. By daylight, Eleanor played the role of the shocked widow. Composed face, soft voice, sorrowful murmurs about the tragedy. She received condolences from neighbors and allowed them to believe whatever story made them comfortable. At night, behind closed doors in a remaining outbuilding that smelled of smoke and damp wood, she laid out plans in whispers. Dinah brought names people with small children, people with scars that proved they would not survive another decade of cotton people whose spouses had already been sold north and who had nothing left to lose. Others came quietly not to beg, but to offer skills, a man who knew the river routes, a woman who could read signs like weather, a boy who could climb and watch roads for riders. Eleanor learned quickly that freedom was not a single leap. It was a chain of hard choices. She had imagined rescue like a storybook, one brave act, one triumphant departure. The reality was logistics and risk management. It was deciding who could travel fast and who could not. It was understanding that a crying baby could expose everyone, yet still refusing to leave any child behind. It was accepting that safety did not exist, only odds that could be improved with preparation. Dinah negotiated with the network the way a general negotiates supply lines. The peddler who had delivered Elijah's letter returned, and with him came coded messages, names of safe houses, signals to look for a lantern hung in a left window, a white cloth tied to a fence post, a hymn hummed softly on a porch as proof of welcome. There were rules: never stay in one place longer than a night, never trust a stranger who asked too many questions, never travel in groups larger than could plausibly be explained. Even for Eleanor, whiteness was not a shield if the wrong man decided she looked like a woman in moral trouble. Money was necessary, but money also left tracks. Eleanor sold what remained of her jewelry to traders who would not ask questions, accepting lower prices for speed and discretion. She wrote receipts with a steady hand because even a widow's handwriting could be inspected later. She cut her hair slightly shorter, pinned it under a plain bonnet, practiced looking ordinary in art she had never needed when she lived as a spectacle. Sometimes she caught herself staring at her own hands, at the pale skin that granted her a kind of passage others could never claim. The injustice of it made her sick, but she also understood that refusing to use it would be another form of cruelty. In a world built on unequal tools, you used what you had, or you watched people die. Not everyone who wanted to go could go at once. Some chose to stay behind to protect elders too frail to travel or to wait for another chance. Eleanor wrote down their names in her head like a vow: I will not forget you. Mama Seraphine refused to run. Her legs were swollen, her back bent. "I've seen enough running," she said, voice steady. "My job now is to keep the young ones alive until they can go." She pressed Eleanor's hands between her own rough palms. "You get up there and you tell the truth. Don't you let them write us out of history." On the last night before the escape, rain fell again, light and persistent. It softened the world, blurred footprints, drowned scent. Dinah called it blessing. Others called it luck. Eleanor stood at the edge of the quarters, watching shadows gather families, carrying bundles of food, a wrapped pot, a quilt, a Bible with missing pages. One man held a small sack of soil from the place his mother was buried, as if carrying proof that he had once belonged to a land that did not belong to him. Eleanor felt the weight of what she was doing settle into her bones. If they were caught, the punishment would be monstrous. If she was caught, she might be dragged back and locked away as hysterical or mad. Her choices erased by men who believed women existed only under supervision. And yet, standing there, she realized that for the first time her fear did not feel like a chain. It felt like a signal that something real was at stake. They left in waves, not all at once. Some departed in a wagon with a false floor hidden beneath sacks of grain. Others walked through the cypress swamps where horses could not easily follow. Eleanor traveled with Dinah and two families posing at checkpoints as a widow taking servants to visit relatives. It was a lie wrapped around a deeper truth: the servants were human beings claiming themselves. At river crossings, they waited until night and listened for patrols. They learned the sound of distant hooves and froze in mud breath held hearts hammering until danger passed. More than once, Eleanor watched Dinah step forward to speak to white men with the practiced humility of someone trained to survive their attention. Each time, Eleanor felt rage rise at the performance forced on Dinah, at the way the world responded to her own voice, with deference it denied to the woman saving her. There were losses. One group was forced to split when a patrol appeared sooner than expected. A teenage boy panicked and ran, drawing riders after him like dogs after blood. Eleanor never learned if he made it. A mother's hands shook so badly she dropped a bundle into the river. She cried silently, not for the bundle, but for the memory it carried. In one safe house, a Quaker woman treated a child's fever with herbs and cold cloths, working through the night as if the child were her own. Kindness, Eleanor learned, was often quiet, practical, and braver than speeches. By the time they reached the border, winter had sharpened the air into a blade. Eleanor's lungs burned with it, but she welcomed the pain. Cold meant distance from Louisiana, distance from cotton fields and summer heat, and the smell of a mansion built on suffering. Crossing into Canada was not a triumphant march. It was a weary step through snow with numb feet. But when a conductor whispered, "You're across now," Eleanor watched Dinah's face change in a way she would never forget. Not joy, exactly. More like disbelief giving way to breath. Like a person realizing for the first time that tomorrow might belong to her. Freedom did not erase trauma. In the first weeks, the people who had run woke at every sudden sound, expecting whips, expecting orders, expecting to be reclaimed. Dinah kept a small knife under her pillow even in the safest room because safety felt like a trick. Eleanor woke from dreams of fire and locked doors, heart-racing hands, searching for a handle that was no longer there. Elijah, when she finally neared his town, feared meeting her almost as much as he longed for it. Hope, he had learned, was a kind of risk. But the North offered something the South never could: the possibility that risk might lead to life rather than only death. Over the next 3 weeks, Eleanor used what remained of her resources, jewelry connections, the deceptive invisibility of whiteness, to arrange an escape for 17 enslaved people through underground routes. Some would reach Canada. Some would find freedom in northern states. Some would be caught and dragged back into punishment. But all would have tried. On a cold November morning, Eleanor and Dinah left as Charles's brother arrived to take possession of the shattered fortune. They moved through safe houses, hidden compartments in wagons, forests at night. Always north, always toward a different kind of life. 4 months later, in March 1854, Eleanor reached a small town outside Toronto. She found Elijah working as a carpenter, living in a modest room that belonged to him alone. When she appeared at his door, he stared as if seeing a ghost. "Eleanor," he whispered. "I told you I was coming," she said, and then she was in his arms. They cried like people who had crossed hell and survived. 3 weeks later, they married, scandalizing some and inspiring others, building a home in defiance of everything the South had insisted was impossible. Dinah found work as a seamstress. Later, she married a formerly enslaved man from Kentucky and spent her life helping new escapees learn to live free. Eleanor never returned to Louisiana. She wrote accounts under a pseudonym telling the truth of what she had witnessed and what she had been complicit in. She did not paint herself as a saint. She did not pretend her awakening erased the harm of her past. She wrote because bearing witness mattered. Eleanor and Elijah planted a garden behind their house, and over time it became a memorial. A magnolia tree for every person they had known who died enslaved, every Ruth, every Grace, every name the world tried to erase. In that garden, they told their children stories not of pity, but of resistance, of the courage to run, to choose danger over degradation, to insist on humanity when the law denied it. In Louisiana, people turned the burned ruins of Bowmont into a legend, a cautionary tale about pride, about violating social order. But those who understood the truth saw something else in the ash. Not a warning, a monument. Proof that the hierarchy built on violence could be challenged, that love could become rebellion, and that sometimes the only way to protect what is human is to risk everything the world demands you surrender. Some victories are loud, others are small as a hand held for one forbidden minute in a dark workshed. But the smallest ones can change the shape of a life, and sometimes, if enough people dare to remember, they can change the shape of history too. In the years that followed, Eleanor learned that leaving the South was not the end of her complicity. It was the beginning of accountability. She wrote at a small desk by a northern window, hands still remembering silk gloves now ink-stained and steady. She published under a false name, sending essays and testimonies to abolitionist printers in New York and Boston, careful to protect the roots and people who had helped them. Elijah kept building tables, door frames, stair rails work that created rather than consumed. When their first child was born, Eleanor watched Elijah hold the baby with reverence, as if afraid the world might still steal what was his. Dinah, older and sharper, became the one newcomers sought out when they arrived, trembling at a safe house door, because she could look at fear and speak to it plainly. You're here. Breathe. You belong to yourself now. After emancipation finally came, in the United States, refugees still arrived, people uprooted by war, by poverty, by the long afterlife of bondage. Eleanor and Dinah met them at stations with blankets and bread, translating fear into practical steps, a job lead, a place to sleep, a name of someone who could be trusted. The magnolias in their garden kept growing, each one a quiet refusal to forget. And when their grandchildren asked why the trees mattered, Elijah would say softly but without hesitation that names are a kind of freedom, and remembering is a kind of justice.